I was just a kid trying to buy gas, you know what I mean? Counting crumpled bills and thinking about a quiz on Monday when a cruiser slid in hot, and a voice I'd never heard before decided my skin was a crime. His hand hit my shoulder, shoved me into my own bike, metal hot from the sun, and he said it like a verdict, hands where I can see them, how long you been hanging around planning to steal something, and I remember the smell of gasoline and old tobacco and fear. I remember the clerk going quiet behind the glass and a woman at pump 2 whispering, "He's just a kid," and Lieutenant Joe Myers snapping his glare at her like a dog off the chain. "You want to be next?" And I said what every parent teaches their kid to say, "Yes, sir." Registration's in the seat. I can show you. But he was already rifling through it, flicking my wallet to the ground, smirking like the whole scene was a joke he'd told 100 times and always got a laugh. And then that little red light on his body blinked on the only heartbeat in the whole place that felt steady, and I thought for a second it meant something I really did like. If the world watched, it would behave. That's on me. That's how 16 works. The SUV rolled in like a prayer you didn't dare ask for, and my mom stepped out, one of those people who doesn't waste motion or breath when the room is on fire. Special Agent Mariah Lewis. And I know some of you hear those 3 letters and think 1,000 different things, but to me that day, they looked like a shield. She kept her voice low and even. "Sergeant, take your hands off my son." And Joe tried to laugh it off. "Lady, who do you think you are?" And she didn't pitch a speech. She showed the badge and said it plain. "I'm his mother and a federal agent, and you're using force on a minor who did nothing wrong." And the sun caught her badge and the camera's red light, and for a half beat, his face flickered like he'd seen his reflection tell the truth. Then he doubled down. Bullies do that when they realize they're being watched. He yanked my cuffed wrists up like a flag you raise to show who's in charge, and pain lit up my shoulder, and I said, "Mom," because I was still a kid, even if the world wanted me to be a suspect. And out of the second cruiser came Officer Adam, younger eyes still honest, saying, "Joe, maybe slow down," and Joe told him to shut up without moving his mouth. That's a talent some men practice their whole lives. People started filming, phones rising one by one like a field of small brave flags, and Joe's taser lifted just enough to turn the air to glass, and Mom kept her hands visible and her spine locked and said, "If you touch him again, I'm going to arrest you." And he said, "Go ahead," like a dare. And I watched the camera's light blink like a timer, and I understood the twist way before it made the news. Cameras don't always save you. Sometimes they belong to the same machine that wants you quiet. That was Act 1 for us. The moment the ordinary day burned away, the reporter showed the clerk found his nerve through the glass. Mom made a single sentence that could fit on a brick wall. "No one is above the law and no kid is below it." And for a beat it looked like decency might win on points, but the system doesn't sleep, it just rearranges the furniture. Here's where the "yeah, that happened" parts begin to stack. We tried to upload Joe's body cam to the FBI server. The progress bar crawled like a wounded animal, then froze. Then Mom's access got suspended by a voice that didn't belong to any person. "Please await further instructions," and a name kept showing up in whispers and missed calls and doors that didn't open. Agent Harland. The kind of man who ironed his conscience every morning and called it protocol, and suddenly there were cars behind us that weren't behind us. Men with internal affairs on their jackets who didn't look like they'd ever read a case file. Hallways with lights that went dark for exactly the amount of time a story needs to change. And somewhere between a stairwell and an office with stale coffee, we lost someone good. Agent Carroll, the kind of partner my mom trusted with the parts of herself she didn't put on the badge. And as the power cut and radios barked and boots slid on old tile, she told us the truth between breaths. The backup that erases everything isn't a password in a server, it's a physical key hidden in a badge, and if the wrong man dies, it locks for good or wipes the evidence while the country is asleep. They even named it Phoenix, because of course the machine that burns proof would pretend to rise noble from ashes it made. And I didn't understand the math of it, but I understood this part. If we don't get that key, what happened to me becomes a rumor by morning. The parking lot where it broke open felt like the back of a forgotten mall rain trying to decide if it would fall sodium lights, making everything look like last week's memory. Mom stepped out first and told Joe to hand over his badge. No heat in it, no lecture, just a request spoken at the temperature, where truth lives. He grinned like a man who still believed the world would cover for him and said, "You're suspended, you're no one tonight." And she said, "Then you should have nothing to fear." And he went for a gun because he wanted a do-over, and all he got was a warning shot that cracked the ground at his fingers, because that's who my mother is, relentless, not reckless. Adam caught a round in the arm and somehow kept his voice calm. Joe staggered, blood soaking his sleeve, and still tried to talk himself into being the hero you think you've won. And Mom said, "No, but you're going to tell me who gave the order." And he laughed and said the name out loud like a confession no one would believe Harland. And that was the siren you couldn't hear, because right then black SUVs rolled in, voices on loudspeakers calling my mother a shooter. Men with clean shoes and cold eyes moving like chess pieces. They zip-tied, the only person who had kept anybody breathing. And she looked at me once, barely a nod. But if you are somebody's child, you know what that nod means. Keep it safe. I don't remember the exact moment the Phoenix key landed in my palm. I just remember walking away like a kid who got told the game was over while the score was still moving, hoodie heavy in the pocket. Heart pounding out a map I'd never studied. And I know some of you will say, why didn't you run to the nearest news station or church or state senator? And I hear you, I do. But when you have lived your whole life understanding that the story can be rewritten by the people who hold the pen, you learn to move first and explain later. So I ran past chain-link fences that bit past the barking dog that knew which cars held chips through the alley behind the bowling alley over a yard, where a sprinkler lied about summer, and then the freight yard opened up like the last bad idea in a movie, and I grabbed the ladder on the last car, and it knocked the wind out of me, but handed me back something else a chance. There was a man already in that boxcar tall coat that had seen real winters, and before I could panic, he put his hands where I could see and said it soft. "Name's Grant. Your mom dragged me out of a federal archive fire back in Detroit. You look like her when you've made up your mind, and I didn't trust him. But he didn't demand it. He unfolded a paper map like we weren't holding the future in a piece of metal the size of a stick of gum. And he said the line that turned Act 2 into a plan. There's an old emergency broadcast station on the edge of the city pre-Phoenix. If the hardware isn't rusted shut, we can hijack public safety for 2 minutes. And I said 2 minutes won't fix a life. And he said 2 minutes can unlock one. You got the key, and I didn't answer because the hoodie already had. But when we slid off the train at a fuel stop and cut across weeds to a yellow steel door and a padlock that wanted to retire, when the lights in that dusty room woke up like someone whispered their name when I pushed the Phoenix key into a data port built before I was born, and the screen said access granted like it had been waiting for me, that's when I believed this twist could actually twist. The menu wasn't a menu, it was a maze designed by someone who never wanted you to find the thing you came for. But I had the sun burned into my memory, and the sound of his voice burned into my bones, so I scrolled for the timestamp and hit play, and the gas station came back in fisheye and bad audio, Joe's tone sneering. "Sir, huh, cute," my breath hitching when he lifted my cuffed arms too high, my mom's voice cutting through heat. "Take your hands off my son." And I swear for a second the room had more people in it than two. Like the country pulled up a chair and we hit transmit and the bar crawled, then stalled at 47%, and Grant cursed in a language that made the breakers cooperate and kicked a panel that had the personality of a stubborn mule, and the number jumped. And when it hit 100, the station monitors changed to places we weren't in: a diner, where a woman put down her fork, a barber shop where no one moved the clippers, a bus stop where strangers stood shoulder to shoulder without meaning to, you know what I mean? That hush, when the truth is finally louder than the noise. Times Square lit up like a sermon, small towns and big ones, living rooms and laundromats, and it wasn't edited and it wasn't narrated and it didn't have mood music to make it easier to swallow. It was what happened, and for 2 minutes that felt like a lifetime. The country watched exactly how a badge decided a boy was a suspect and how a mother decided not today. Of course, Harlan stormed the station with a team that moved like one long shadow, yelling to cut the feed and shut it down. But that's not how ketchup works, and that's not how the internet works either. The auto mirrors had already bounced the broadcast to backup channels, and the phones outside began buzzing like angry bees. Internal Affairs, the one with warrants that bite, pushed in with paper that had teeth obstruction evidence tampering abuse of power. The words we had been shouting into pillows for years, and for once they didn't bounce off the ceiling. Adam, pale and bleeding through his bandage, still had enough spine to stand there and read Harland his rights and not his excuses. And if you were waiting for a movie cheer, it didn't sound like that. It sounded like air rushing back into a room, like oxygen admitting it was late. They let my mom out because there were too many eyes to lie to all at once, not because the world got holy while we were busy. We walked down those steps and she didn't give them a victory speech. She gave them the only line I will keep in my pocket till the day. I don't need pockets. Justice has no color. Fear does. And we've let it wear a badge long enough, and the crowd clapped, and some cried, and some stood completely still like they finally tuned to a frequency that had been humming under everything for years. And I held her hand like a promise, and she squeezed back like an answer. Epilogues are always messier than you want, DOJ said, awed out loud. Some good cops. And yes, there are good cops. Save your comment for 2 minutes and hear me. Reopened old cases. Our mailbox filled with letters that started with, "I'm sorry," and some that started with worse. Harlan made bail because power doesn't switch off in a night. Joe's lawyers practiced the phrase out of context like it could erase what a camera showed. Grant disappeared the way men who know too much choose to. Adam went back to work, and when he shakes my hand he uses both, like he means it. And the Phoenix system lost a head, and grew 2 others in cities I've never seen because that's how these hydras behave. But even hydras have to flinch when a nation looks right at them, you know what I mean? So here's where I leave you and where you step in, because I can carry a key and a story and a scar, but I can't carry a country by myself. Tell me what part of this feels right to you and what part feels wrong. Tell me about the time someone rewrote your moment to make you smaller and themselves bigger. Tell me where you're watching from, so I know how far this traveled, if you wear a badge and you do it right. I want to hear what you wish your department would fix if you think I'm exaggerating. I want to know why, and I want you to say it plain, so we can lay facts next to feelings and see what breathes. That's how grown people argue and stay human. Hit subscribe if you want the next chapter, because this machine didn't die tonight. It just learned our names. Share this with the person in your life who says it's complicated, because they're not wrong, it is, but it isn't confusing. A man tried to make my skin a crime, and a woman with a badge said the story ends different. Now, I'm Marcus. I still ride that rattly bike that leaks oil and sings hope, and if you're still here, I think your engine's humming too.